We are just getting ready to get rolling on our next session, and I am delighted with our second working group to welcome Charles Kennelly of Esri UK and Mark Enzer of the DT Hub and many, many other ventures. And then Ben Ford of Network Rail will be joining us here very shortly, but I'm going to pass off to Charles for now.
Can you hear me? Yep, talking? Here okay? Yep, thank you. Oh, I've got one here. Okay, good morning everybody. So Ben is here. Hopefully he will more physically be here. So we're talking about one of the working groups and our findings around the standards and interoperability side. Possibly the most boring of the working groups, but let's find out. So let's start with the requirement, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on the requirement because the reason we're all here is because I think we understand the requirement, which is we want digital twins to talk to each other. And why do we want them to talk to each other? To improve the world we live in, to prepare for climate change, to mitigate against the impacts of climate change, to have more efficient systems. That is the requirement. And in order to achieve that requirement, we need digital twins to talk to each other. Hello? Mic problem. Is that better? Can you hear me now? Do I need to repeat what I just said? And here's Ben. So when you sit down to do a working group on standards and interoperability, one of your jobs is to look at the standards. And when you are doing that in the context of digital twins, it's an interesting problem because there are lots of standards existing, lots and lots of standards. And there are lots of industries that have developed standards within themselves. So for example, in the banking industry, there's very well-established systems where you can use different people's credit cards to pay for different organizations' bills, and it all works. In the airline industry, you can transfer bookings most of the time between airlines and stuff. There's lots of people who've solved the problem of different systems talking to each other. However, in the world of digital twins, they are not heterogeneous systems. They are heterogeneous systems. We're not talking about self-similar systems talking to each other. We're talking about electrical networks, talking to gas networks, talking to water networks, talking to the natural environment, talking to the atmosphere. Every system is different. And trying to build a perfect solution that allows all of these systems to talk together is a very hard problem, very difficult. Other considerations are, if we look at utilities in the UK, for example, water utilities, gas utilities, electrical utilities, telcos, they manage their assets, their infrastructure, to do their ordinary day-to-day jobs. And they do not have up-to-date data for their own uses. If the water companies had full, complete data of all of their networks, we probably would have less leakage. It's a hard problem keeping data up to date for day-to-day business. If we then layer on an additional set of standards and say you all need to be able to talk to each other and produce data in these additional formats, it's a very, very big ask. Also, these organizations are not all created equal in terms of their skills. Some have access to really, really skilled people who are doing data modeling and ontologies, and other ones are struggling to get their IT teams to do what they need. Every organization is not the same. These are the sort of background that we work within. There are also other considerations around security. Like in Ukraine right now, a very useful set of information is where does the water network connect to the electricity network? If we take that out, we're impacting a lot of people. But publishing that information is a big issue. Another issue is the sharing of data just from privacy point of view. Privacy is a major concern. So there are lots of considerations we need to think about when we talk about bringing all of these systems together. It's not an easy problem. So we sit and think about, how do you solve this? What are the principles on which interoperability should happen? And some of those principles are very, very obvious. Open standards is a very obvious thing that we need to have. Any standards we use need to be open. They cannot be proprietary to individual organizations and so on. So we need open standards. But there's other sort of principles we should look at. Data sharing itself, for privacy reasons and everything else, can be a problematic issue. Partly because of quality, but also, if I am a water engineer, and I need to understand about an electrical network, sending me the circuit diagram of the electrical network, water and electricity don't mix well. I'm not qualified to make sense of that, thank you. I'm not qualified to make sense of that information. What I need is not access to your data, I need access to your understanding. And not just access to your understanding of what you do, I need access to understand that if I carry out this action, what does it mean for you? if I carry out this action, how are you constraining me? If I do this, like build a new pumping station for a water network, is there enough electricity supply to service that pumping station? You know, and if we're looking at the water network, I need to understand about the catchment area I'm drawing that water from and the climate change impact of the next 10 years. All these systems have to talk, and that is a tricky thing. And sharing data is a good, valid thing we should do. We should encourage data sharing as much as possible, but it won't necessarily help the level of interconnectivity that we need to achieve. So the principles are to federate wherever possible, not to bring data all into one place, not to access all data, but to ask questions of those systems, not to come up with very, very definitive systems that people need to. If somebody has to do their day job again, a water company has got a day job of providing water. They need to manage their networks. The interconnectivity, ideally, should come as a byproduct of that, not as an additional task. So that's some of the principles. So the approach that we took was, this is one of my favorite quotes by Einstein, everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. He went on to say something along the lines of, any intelligent fool could make something bigger and more complicated. It takes courage to do the opposite. We could create more standards and so on. So the approach is to look at something simpler. And Mark, I'm going to jump on you. I think it'd be a good point for you to make some points on this.
Terminology for this. I think this is working actually. When we're looking for some better words, by the way, but we talked about a minimum viable thing. Because we couldn't think of a better word than thing at the time. So this whole idea of making it as simple as possible, but not simpler, having something that we together share to enable the sharing of data is absolutely key to make this whole thing work. But what we don't want to do is try and invent all the possible standards that you could possibly have in order to share data. You know, this idea that I think Charles puts across, really simply with Einstein's view, is let's identify the minimum possible thing that we need to share together that will enable this data sharing to start going. And we think that it has a number of components. We think that there's a governance component to that, because if you look at analogs, like the internet protocols, there has to be some kind of governance over it, but it's shared open governance. We think that there's a semantic component because basically there's a semantic solution in here somewhere. And we think there's probably some shared software. Not a lot of shared software, but certain amounts of shared software that opens all of this up. But fundamentally, what we're aiming for is the minimum that we possibly need in order to get this ball rolling. Once the ball's rolling, other people can add other stuff. So we don't think our job is to solve all the problems. It's to solve the central problem. And crucially, to do it together.
Cool. Thank you. Anything to add, Ben, on that?
Well, I'll build on that.
Okay, fine. So our recommendations as the Data Standards Interoperability Working Group is not to develop standards. We feel it is too early. There is too much innovation that is required. There is too much change which is needed. There's too much thinking to be done for us to say, here is the interoperability standard, conform to this. The analogy of the internet is a very, very good one. The protocols that govern and the governance around the internet, they don't tell you the data structure of every web page. They just tell you, if you want to send information, here's a mechanism for doing it, and here's how you validate that and publish what you need to publish. The world of APIs, if you want to interconnect two systems together, get a team of developers and give them an access to two APIs. They don't care what, as long as they're well documented, they will connect them and they will do things with them. The growth of AI is a very, very interesting area. So at the core of ChatGPT and models like that is an algorithm called a transformer. And the transformer is a way of translating between different systems. One system might be English and another system might be French. One system might be English text and the other system could be the position of color and shape on a page or artwork. One system could be an electrical network and another system could be a water network. We're just translating between these different systems. So recommendation-wise, the main one is what Mark just said. It's about fostering and facilitating this environment, fostering and facilitating learning. There are lots of successful projects out there that are solving these problems already. There are lots of unsuccessful projects out there that are learning good lessons that we need to learn from. We should be selling both. Just as a bit of an aside, there was a project called the Inspire Protocol. Anybody aware of this? Yeah. It was a very good project in terms of concept about 15 years ago, came from the European Union. It was to share data across Europe, data on forestry and rivers and so on. And they went, over the course of 10 years, they developed perfect data standards that here's how you specify a forest, here's how you specify all the data modeling, all the XML you could think of. They specified how you shared that data, how you published it technically, how you service levels. They did everything correct. They even got it written into European law, and then it came into British law. So it is British law to provide Inspire services. It's almost entirely failed. And one of the reasons it almost entirely failed, it was too perfect. It was too hard for mortals to produce. It coped without, the modeling was good. The implementation was next to impossible. And therefore, many, many organizations in the UK are officially breaking the law by not publishing. And it's a real lesson in that we have to have, do not have long to achieve what we need to achieve in terms of mitigating climate change. And if we have to solve that problem by building the ultimate standard that covers every heterogeneous system in the world, we're not going to do it in time. But there are lots of clever people working on lots of clever things. So the main thing is about putting the structures in place to foster the development of this sector and highlight the successes and failure and work towards what Mark laid out there. Yeah. Okay.
So, so to build on that then, so we've concluded that we can't define standards, so we need to foster this environment and tackle some of the challenges and help people address them. So let's try and create a shared view of what those various problems and challenges might be. And that was what we did with our wonderful working group led by Sarah. Thank you very much, Sarah, and everybody who participated in this. So this is an empirically derived model of the problem space. So this was achieved by asking people, to define what the challenges are they're facing and understanding how they fit together. It's a complex new space. There's lots of different interacting factors. There's lots of interdependencies. So this is an aim to try and understand the dynamics of those so that we can find where the vicious cycles are, where the conflicting drivers are. And once you create this kind of thing, it helps you create solutions people can agree to that can be impactful and that can be sustainable. So that's kind of the rationale of taking this approach. And you get this sort of simple graph database. So I'll interpret it for you a little bit. So the sort of the striking feature of this particular map is that you've got end up with three clusters. Like I say, it's built bottom up, so there's no ideology gone into this. This is what's emerged from asking people how the problems interact. And you have this cycle of how point solutions on the left here. You get a problematic solution, often a point solution. In the railway, we have that problem. And then because we've got these little point solutions, they don't integrate well, and they create more complexity. And you get this proliferation of small solutions solving little problems that make it harder to integrate, so it's even harder to create an integrated solution, and round and round and round you go. And it's very hard to have the courage to stop that and change that. And yes, there is a semantic solution to that. That's why you've got that little roundel there on number 16 to the right there, where it says the mass semantic misalignment. That one there you go. Thank you, Charles. So that's an area we can tackle over time. So the little roundels indicate where there might be some traction to be gained. Because can we directly tackle variable and lacking adoption standards? It's very hard to directly tackle that, but we can tackle the things that feed those problems, and we can disrupt this problem space. So yes, there is a semantic solution to that. That'll take time. There are other things we can do in other areas that can help us address some of these things and break down these cycles. And they'll be different in everybody's industries and everybody's sectors. But this is a general model, so it's useful to take this and look at, okay, how does this apply to me? Am I experiencing these problems? Are these cycles the same in my world? Interestingly, we then have this sort of a separate thing around leadership on the side there. Was the cycle of sort of we don't have leadership, so we don't have capability, so we can't deliver anything, so nobody wants to be a leader anymore, or nobody can take a sustainable leadership position. So you have this cycle over here driving that specialist management capability, and of course there are often good reasons not to share data, and if you haven't got leadership, you can't overcome the fact there are good reasons, right? It's the old JP Morgan statement. There's two reasons you do anything. There's a good reason and the real reason, right? There's people often have lots and lots of real reasons. And if you give them some good reasons, they'll use those as very good reasons not to do those things they don't want to do anyway. And we know digital twins disrupt the power dynamics. They fundamentally change the dynamics of power in organizations. So this is a really important cycle for us to break. And there's a clear challenge there between leadership and good reasons that we need to solve. And hopefully the TRIB roadmap that's been launched, they can help us with some of that, which is great. And the other sort of the next layer that we've got down there is this down the bottom right. Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, hidden by the water. We've got sort of this three-way relationship going on here between sort of the question of rights management, the complexity of rights management, the need for stakeholders to be comfortable with what's going on, and the complexity of creating benefits cases, and that's kind of an iron triangle. It's a three-way trade-off where everything's pushing against everything else, and that's a real challenge in and of itself. So I think there's some more exploration to be done in these areas, and I'm keen to engage people in understanding what their challenges are. There's a workshop this afternoon in one of the other streams where you can contribute to that a little bit, and we'll maybe expand on what this really means in the sort of the management space and the leadership space a bit more. I think the community we had was more focused on some of the high-level technical stuff, which is helpful. So I'm interested in any views and thoughts on this. Please email them to me, let me know. Thank you.
I'm thinking that the stuff that I'm keen to add will probably come out of the questions, and if it doesn't, I'll add it anyway.
And then just to sort of think, recommendation-wise, just to restate, it's about developing this community and supporting it, looking for good practice, the stuff that Ben just talked about facilitating this. And also, one thing we want to look at is commissioning some research to look at other ways of tackling these problems, such as AI-based things. So there's a need for fundamental research to be done in this area as well, in parallel with the sort of projects we're doing today and so on. And at that point, we're open to questions. It's also a very cool room to sit in, cool-wise. So, thank you. You read the questions.
So we have quite a few questions online. So what I encourage everybody to do on Slido is to upvote any questions that you may like, just so we can make sure to hit the hard-hitting questions. To start, I don't know if that's really a question, Dan, but I guess I will read it off. Dan from BSI, thank you, Dan. Also on our community council as well, so driving us forward. Disagree that it's too early to standardize. While it might be for the standard processes, we can standardize other things, concepts, principles, and key terminology. In doing so, we can bring together stakeholders together through a common language, allowing us to collaborate on the rules. Do you guys have any comments?
Can I lead off on that one? Because I think we need some new words. So that there's some very clever lawyers in the room. I can see them on the front row. Can you come up with some new words that kind of fit this space that will help us to talk about what we really mean here? Because I totally get what Dan's saying there. Because we need to have shared approaches. That's kind of what we absolutely need, our shared approaches. However, the thing that people push back against is the feeling of a standard that seems like a tablet of stone where it's been written in and you can't change it, and it stifles innovation. Now, that's exactly not what Dan means when he says standard. And when we're talking about shared approaches, it's very much closer to what Dan means. We're struggling with the word standard. And I think when you use that kind of key word, it kicks off all sorts of thoughts of people in the industry of, no, I don't want a standard, it will constrain me. And what we're saying is that these shared approaches will do the opposite of constraining. They're key enablers to bring us together so that we can do this thing. So like I say, I think we need a new word that fits in this space. And I know that BSI are working really hard on agile standards, being able to get up to date really quickly with what is emerging, rather than waiting for 20 years worth of experience to turn it into a tablet of stone. So we definitely need something in this space. What I think we're collectively talking about are these shared approaches. And the final thing I'd like to say in this space is about the meeting of the top-downness and the bottom-upness. Because what we so often come across in engaging across the industry is that you have some experts that would like to kind of come up with a perfect way of doing something and kind of impose it top down. And lots of people rail against that. Like, don't tell me what's right. I want to kind of learn from doing and progressing by sharing. And then you've got lots of other people who just kind of want to kind of get on and do some stuff. And then share it, and something will emerge that will become a standard. And my view is that it's not one or the other. We actually need to get the best of both worlds. We definitely need to learn by doing. That's one of the mantras of the Digital Twin Hub. just do some stuff, learn, share it, because good things will emerge from just practice. But I think also we do need to recognise the value that expert communities bring, because experts know some stuff and they can help to inform. So let's not kind of say that it's one or the other. Let's get the best of both worlds, of expert communities and practitioner communities coming together around this shared approach that I think we all want.
Just a little bit on my view on that is, what we're not saying is there shouldn't be standards and we shouldn't develop standards. What we're saying is, and there has been some sort of pressure almost for, that this is not the time for the perfect solution. Here is your fixed standard for everything. There's not a framework which is going to solve every problem. We're still too early for that. The development of the standards we need and working with them and having common languages for the things which are common is really important. We're talking about the fostering of that development. And there are many standards out there we can harness, and there may be new ones we need to create. But what we shouldn't do is say, here is the answer, it's now done.
Okay. On to the next question. How can we get more involved with the Standards and Interoperability Working Group?
That depends who you are, doesn't it? Anonymous person. I don't know. I mean, this is something we need to talk about, isn't it? We've kind of had this wonderful group that Sarah chairs, which gives us a little think tank. But I think there is a broader question that we need to answer there, and I don't think we have an answer to that today, do we? Really?
One thing we said is the next stage is the ability to do more work on this and to pull together this governance environment and so on. So there will be more opportunities for more people getting involved. We just don't know the exact structure yet. But that is the next stage.
Yeah, and I think there is another thing in here, is that we think that we've spoken to enough people, there's been enough engagement now to be really pretty confident about the way forwards. And I guess I take some encouragement from the kind of the nods that were happening around the room, when Charles was speaking. I even saw a few nods when I was speaking. It's like this feels like it is the right kind of thing to do. It's very open, it's very inclusive, it's kind of growing stuff from the community. This is kind of what we want. However, we think we've kind of got to the point of saying we now can describe what we want. We actually need some money, we need some funding to go and do it. And it almost seems like we've got to the end of the road of talking about it now. We know this. We've got to get on and do some doing. But that does need some money. And there is money out there because people are spending tens of millions on data structures and architectures, etc. But when it comes to having something which is more of a shared approach, we kind of need a way of getting some money into it, I think. So I like what Ben is saying. The other thing that I would want to say about the involvement here is that I think that an awful lot of the involvement will be by just doing some stuff and sharing it. That is something that the DT Hub will be very, very good at facilitating and kind of convening. I think an awful lot of what is needed in this space is actually bringing people together, because there's an awful lot of activity in digital twins around the place now. I'm sure you're aware of it. The whole Isle of Wight demonstrator, the stuff that's happening with Credo 2, the stuff that's happening in the Alan Turing Institute. There's some interoperability work being done by the Department for Business and Trade called the GIIG, G-I-I-G. Really good stuff happening. We kind of need to bring it together. There's a convening thing that is needed. So you're asking how you can get involved. You definitely can get involved. We need some money, and then let's kind of work out some actual things to actually do.
Well, great. So for the next question, do the Standards/Interoperability group agree that we need much more focus on data engineering than is currently happening in the DT world?
I love a wouldn't you agree question. It's great. Broadly, yes. I think probably we do need more focus on data engineering, but I think more than that, we need more focus on business cases, use cases, communication, understanding, skills. I think they're actually in many ways more of a challenge to us at the moment, because we just can't get the investment in unless we can get people aligned around the work.
another little thing to add in, I think there's also a whole load of work which is needed in the modelling space as well. So if we're getting these shared approaches around data and data sharing and minimising the friction on information flow, which is what we've been talking about, that's all really good. What we should also be doing is advancing the state of the art in the actual modelling that sits at the heart of digital twins and making a lot of that shared too. Because when it comes down to it, digital twins are about data, but they're also about models. And so what we should be doing is sharing both, because that will advance the overall state of the art much quicker.
Just slightly expanding on that as well, I think one of the other issues that really need tackling is data quality, because I think it's one of the biggest barriers to the actual work that needs done is the quality of the information. It might be in the right structure and the right format, but if it's not complete or if it's incorrect, it's going to lessen the benefits. So tied in with the engineering side is how do we ensure quality is delivered in data and correctness in it.
Well, great. The next question is, platforms like NUAR, National Underground Assets Register, have already looked at data models for DTs. Are you engaging with them, and or are there shared innovations running in parallel?
There's loads of data models for digital twins. The built environment's got loads of them. They're all over the place. I think the challenge is how we bring these things together. Are we engaged with NUAR specifically? I don't know. I think we need to. They're on my hit list, but.
Yeah, so I sit on the steering group for NUAR, so the answer is yes, we are engaging, but also the answer is there are many different groups that need to be brought together. And so NUAR has made some absolutely fantastic progress and has been really open in sharing what they're doing. And so a great example of that would be around some of the kind of legal agreements about data sharing. And what NUAR have learnt, they're also sharing. So I think NUAR is a great example, but there are many others. And so what I was saying earlier on about the kind of the convening and bringing things together, I think is really important. So NUAR is definitely part of the picture. It's not the whole picture.
Okay. Would you all mandate a specific format of data, for example, DSTL, i.e. S4, to underpin this minimum valuable solution? There seems to be reluctance from the government to mandate, but we need a standard to work against to remove complexities of a lot of different systems and to enable moving forward together.
Shall I go again on this one? I'm sorry to everyone who's absolutely fed up with my voice by now. So IES4 is a really competent information exchange standard. It grew out of the blue light services and has been used quite extensively already there. It also has the advantage of being based on a 4D ontology for the geeks out there, which means that it's really competent at dealing with time. So rather than time just being a kind of a weird extra feature that you kind of tack on the side of it, it's built on a 4D ontology that means it can properly deal with time. So all of that is very much to be commended for it. IES4 has also been the chosen information exchange standard for the demonstrator on the Isle of Wight that many of you in the room will be familiar with, which looks like it's making some really good progress. So IES4 has a lot to kind of commend it. I don't think it's the only answer. And off the back of the work on the Isle of Wight, there's been some really good development in relation to some of the software that I was talking about. I said we need to have some shared software, and so they've been working on an integration architecture that I believe is now open. I think it's on GitHub, so you can go and have a look for it. So IES4 is lovely. Let's engage with it, but we need more than IES4. We need to be bringing quite a lot together, and IES4 won't cover everything that will be required. So when it comes to this mandating, I think that what would be really useful is for us, at some level, this is where we need the governance. At some level, we need some people to say, we will go for a 4D ontology because that makes sense for everybody. And then we work out how to make that happen. And that might seem a little bit top-down-ish, but it's more like an aspiration than a constraint. And yes, let's work with IES4, but let's also realise that we've got to do a lot more development, that IES4 isn't going to be the answer to everything.
Great. Could could any of you please comment on any recommended open source tools that are out there to help build digital twins?
I can't. There are many of the tools for doing these sort of things are open source, and we make use of them heavily in the organization I work for. I wouldn't go and say, use this, this, or this at this stage.
Yeah, and I've got an opinion on that. I think we should encourage 1,000 flowers to bloom when it comes to digital twins. We can imagine many different digital twins for many different purposes, and we talked about digital twins being suitable, and you can use a digital twin for assets and processes and systems and organizations. They're going to come in lots of different shapes and sizes, so that's where we do need 1,000 flowers to bloom. The bit where I think we need to come together and to have this collaborate on the rules, to compete on the game, is on how we get the digital twins to talk to each other. It's the connecting of digital twins which needs to have the sharing. But when it comes to who can make the best digital twin, that sounds like a fantastic place for the market to go and compete.
Great. So we're going to do one more question, and then we'll wrap up this session. So digital twin advancement often feels like a race to be first. What role can the interoperability and standards group play in ensuring a democratized future?
I think it's a large part of what we are passionate about, having spoken about it, is mandating. Things do need to be mandated. Open standards is a major part of that. That anything that is done is open and available to everyone. We're very conscious we don't want this to be a proprietary approach. That's why there's a need for strong governance and a community working on this to ensure that that is what happens. Proprietary standards will emerge, they will get used and so on, but where we can, we should be looking at making these things as open as possible.
I fully agree. I think to some extent the standards are the responsibilities of the various sectors actually, and how they develop within their sectors actually. So to some extent there's limited amount we can do about that. We need the sectors themselves to take an open approach, and certainly that's something I advocate in the railways is open frameworks. And often we talked about the internet earlier. I often talk about IBM and Microsoft. We need to do to this what Microsoft did to IBM. Open the market and as you say, let 1,000 flowers bloom. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and I likewise feel very passionate about it. I mean, all of us do, which is good because it means we agree. I mean, I think that this point about democratization is like a fundamental requirement. It has to be open. The rules have to be open. What people do with the rules, and what I was saying earlier on about the collaborate on the rules, compete on the game. In the competition, you can keep that private, but the rules have to be shared. And the argument here, the strong argument, is the bigger pie argument, because by having those shared rules, there is a bigger pie. There's more of a game to play. And I think, every single organisation that I have spoken with, I've spoken with loads over the years on this subject, agrees with the bigger pie argument that we need to have those shared rules. And so I think that this democratisation thing about doing the rules out in the open and including people is key to that. If we end up with a proprietary solution that becomes dominant, the pie will be smaller. We collectively have to fight against that being the solution. It will work, but it will just be massively suboptimal.
And not only that, it'll be hard to change.
Yeah,
because they've got a vested interest in retaining those standards.
So talk about
and that really worries me and scares me.
So on this democratisation thing, we need to man the barricades, or woman the barricades, person the barricades, whatever the right verb is. We need to get on the barricades and make sure that the solution we go to is an open, shared solution, because that will end up being better for all of us kind of forever. So let's fight for that.
Well, thank you, Charles, Mark, and Ben, for a great session.